In the mid-1970s, after decades of political turmoil, Greece finally seemed to be on the path to stability. With the introduction of a new constitution and negotiations underway to enter European institutions, many analysts expected Greek politics to follow the pattern of the larger Western world. Then, in 1981, a political party called PASOK came to power. Its charismatic leader, Andreas Papandreou, railed against the new constitution and accused those in power of national betrayal. Opposing Greece's membership in NATO and the European Economic Community, Papandreou promised to govern for the betterment of the common people above all else. He famously declared, "There are no institutions, only the people exist." Papandreou's rise to power isn't a unique story. In many democratic countries around the world, charismatic leaders vilify political opponents, disparage institutions, and claim the mantle of the people. Some critics label this approach as authoritarian or fascist, and many argue that these leaders are using emotions to manipulate and deceive voters. But whether or not this style of politics is ethical, it's certainly democratic, and it goes by the name of populism. The term populism has been around since ancient Rome and has its roots in the Latin word populus, meaning the people. But since then, populism has been used to describe dozens of political movements, often with counterintuitive and sometimes contradictory goals. Populist movements have rebelled against monarchies, monopolies, and a wide variety of powerful institutions. It's not possible to cover the full history of this term here. Instead, we're focusing on one specific type of populism, the kind that describes Papandreou's administration and numerous other governments over the last 70 years, modern populism. But to understand how political theorists define this phenomenon, we first need to explore what it's responding to. In the aftermath of World War II, many countries wanted to move away from totalitarian ideologies. They sought a new political system that prioritized individual and social rights, aimed at political consensus, and respected the rule of law. As a result, most Western nations adopted a long-standing form of government called liberal democracy. In this context, liberal doesn't refer to any political party, but rather a type of democracy that has three essential components. First, liberal democracies accept that society is full of many, often cross-cutting divisions that generate conflict. Second, it requires that society's many factions seek common ground across those divisions. Finally, liberal democracies rely on the rule of law and the protection of minority rights, as specified in constitutions and legal statutes. Taken together, these ideals propose that tolerance and institutions that protect us from intolerance are the bedrock of a functional and diverse democratic society. Liberal democracies helped bring stability to the nations that adopted them, but like any system of government, they didn't solve everything. Among other issues, an ever-increasing wealth gap led to underserved communities who distrusted both their wealthy neighbors and their political leaders. In some cases, political corruption further damaged the public's trust. Growing suspicion and resentment around these politicians primed citizens to look for a new kind of leader who would challenge established institutions and put the needs of the people first. In many ways, this reaction highlights democracy in action. If the majority of a population feels their interests are underrepresented, they can elect leaders to change that using existing democratic systems. But this is where assertive modern populist candidates can subvert democracy. Modern populists identify themselves as embodying the will of the people, and they place those interests above the institutions that protect individual and social rights. Modern populists argue these institutions are run by a self-serving ruling minority who seek to control the vast majority of virtuous common people. As a result, politics is no longer about seeking compromise and consensus through tolerant democratic institutions. Instead, these leaders seek to overturn what they see as a broken system. This means that where a liberal democracy has the utmost respect for institutions like courtrooms, free press, and national constitutions, modern populists disparage any establishment that disagrees with the so-called common will. Modern populist parties have arisen in many places, but the leaders of these movements are remarkably similar. They're often charismatic individuals who identify themselves as embodying the will of the people. They make exorbitant promises to their supporters while casting their opponents as traitors, actively undermining the country. But whether these politicians are sincere believers or manipulative opportunists, the dynamics they unleash can be profoundly destabilizing for liberal democracy. Even when modern populist leaders don't follow through with their most extreme promises, their impact on political discourse, the rule of law, and public trust can long outlast their time in office. How well do you understand power?
Quand un député français de ce Parlement ose dire que le problème qui a eu lieu en Norvège, c'était pas le massacre, mais c'était la naïveté du gouvernement norvégien qui accepte la société multiculturelle, il faut que ce Parlement dise que M. Le Pen est une honte pour ce Parlement d'avoir dit ces paroles.
Et porter un jugement politique sur la politique norvégienne, j'ai été mis en cause par le pédophile comme et j'ai le droit de répondre. J'ai le droit de rappeler qu'il a été mis en cause ici pour avoir hébergé un terroriste de l'action armée rouge. J'ai le droit de défendre mon droit ici, monsieur. Vous ne laissez pas.
So there you see, ladies and gentlemen, Jean-Marie Le Pen, founder of the National Front, with his daughter, Marine Le Pen, who renamed the party the National Rally, whom many are predicting might well win the elections for French president next year. She pushed him out of the party because he's old and too extreme. And this ties in with the previous video I was showing you about populism. I can't find the translation of this exchange between Jean-Marie Le Pen and Daniel Cohn-Bendit. You see here, this individual speaking here in English. I can't find the translation on YouTube in English, and I thought I had found it at one point a month ago, but it's disappeared. And Daniel Cohn-Bendit is a member of the European Parliament, along with, at this time, Jean-Marie Le Pen. This is back several years ago. And he's a leftist. He's a member, I think, of the Green Party in the European Parliament. And he is famous because he was one of the leaders of the students protesting in 1968, which was a tumultuous period throughout the developed world. In 1968, against the President Charles de Gaulle's government in France, and that eventually led to Charles de Gaulle resigning as president. And he was one of the leaders of the student movement leading those protests. And he is French, Jewish, German. And he is being attacked by Jean-Marie Le Pen, the leader of the far right, because he's calling him a pedophile, somebody who has who has sex with children. This reflects, in fact, the statement that Jean-Marie Le Pen, that Daniel Cohn-Bendit made regarding statements in his writings about sex, and he got into big trouble because of it. Let's see if I can find it here. Yes, it says here. What happened there? It says here, the controversy, defense of pedophilia, that Cohn-Bendit made some kind of statements or writings about how, sex between adults and children is not necessarily a bad thing. And here you see, of course, Jean-Marie Le Pen protesting against this left of center intellectual radical on behalf of traditional conservative values about what's right and wrong, and appearing to again attack Daniel Cohn-Bendit and the establishment for being opposed to traditional conservative values. And the reason I mention this is because this has become a big scandal in France, because since that time, there has been an upsurge in scandal about attacking individuals who are intellectuals, leftists, you know, the people like Daniel Cohn-Bendit's type of person being attacked for having in the past favored or admitted that they engaged in pedophilia, sex with children. So, and this has caused a big scandal in the last 2 years in France. And so the French National Assembly adopted late Monday legislation that characterizes sex between adults and minors under 15 as rape, a move made after years of debate and rounds of sexual abuse scandals gradually pushed lawmakers to bring the French criminal code closer to most other Western countries. All right, and this highlights that this all emerged most recently against in France. And a reckoning on child abuse has taken place over the past year amid the fall from grace of a writer who for decades openly engaged in and promoted pedophilia with the support of powerful friends and amid accusations of incest against a prominent French intellectual that surfaced in January. So why am I showing you this? I'm showing you this because you know Marine Le Pen is going to use this in the presidential election as a populist representing the will of the people against these degenerate leftists who in the past, like Daniel Cohn-Bendit, defended pedophilia. I mean, this is outrageous, right? And this is one of the reasons why Marine Le Pen has more and more support. And this is accelerated with fresh allegations of sexual abuse against powerful figures in politics, the arts, the media that fueled the new Me Too movements have also increased pressure on the French government to take action. And so feminists have also taken this up and as well. And of course, if you're a feminist who might be very favorable to seeing finally a woman like Marine Le Pen become president of France, if you're a feminist. So all of this is feeding into this French populism, contributing to the potential, particularly with the economic suffering of the pandemic, to see perhaps Marine Le Pen be positioned to do very well in the next election, better than she did in the last election. And so just to highlight that, because the Marine Le Pen can say, my father, was pointing this out years ago, and we were right. So let's vote for me, Marine Le Pen, president for France. And so I just wanted to highlight the emotions behind these issues. And let me also go back to the stop screen share and go back to the screen and do screen share and open up the notes. And so here are the notes. Where are the notes? There are the notes for this week's chapter. And I want to make sure we leave enough time for the debate. We're interested in Europeanization because we have a lot of different concerns and issues here. Like, for example, we say the European Union is a peace strategy. Is the European Union becoming a United States of Europe? Is there a European demos, a European people emerging, building upon the foundations of French and Italian and German identity, national identities? Is there a European identity emerging? How does a peace strategy dealing with nationalism address those challenges? And that's what European Union and Europeanization is all about. So Europeanization means many, many things. And it is this idea of Europeanization is directed much of the field of European studies. It's focused on how has European integration changed the member states of the European Union specifically? How has it changed administration and public policy in these states? Remember, Europe is the homeland of the institutionalized nation state. The French Revolution is the first mass politics event in modern history, and it produced the nation state model for the rest of the world, right? That Italy or Germany or other countries, Korea, I mean, the Korean institutions, they look to me, much like Charles de Gaulle's Fifth Republic Constitution for France, with a very strong, powerful president and a prime minister. But of course, Korea only has one chamber of the National Assembly. It doesn't have two like France does. How does Europeanization affect parties, political parties in Europe? How does it affect this notion of identity? How do you create a European identity? What does that mean? How does it affect how you address public policy and foreign policy challenges on behalf of Europe, right? Being a European in the European Union with member states and also European Union citizenship. How does it affect the institutional relations between parliaments, that is the executive branches, the executive branch, the prime ministers and presidents, the judicial court branches, the court system, and where is this all heading? What is the trajectory of European integration? Are we going to see nationalism disappear? Are we going to see a European Union new nation that is on top of and more powerful, more intense than French identity, or Italian identity, or Bulgarian identity, or Polish identity? And what impact does the European Union have on countries that want to join the European Union, or interested in joining the European Union, or neighboring on the European Union, like Ukraine? Or let's take the big one. What impact does the European Union have, for example, on Russia? Russia is 150 million people. Russia has a very complicated, intense relationship with Europe. What is the impact of European Union on countries like Russia? Not to mention countries that want to join. Russians now say, under Vladimir Putin, that they do not want to join the European Union, but they were saying different things 20 years ago under a different president. So, but we have seen, as we said earlier, it's all very complicated, particularly now with the rise of crises since the end of the Cold War. Remember, we talked about in class previously how it was easier to cooperate when everyone shared more or less a common perceived enemy, right? The enemy of my enemy, you have the same enemy I do, then you're my friend, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's supposedly an Arabic saying. Someone says it's also a Chinese saying, I don't know. But the point is that when the European Union emerged, it's not a coincidence that the European Union emerged with the Treaty of Maastricht after the Cold War ended, after the Soviet Union disintegrated. So there's no longer a common adversary, if not an enemy, there to encourage and incentivize people to cooperate as closely with each other, particularly among the mass of the public. When, you know, for many years after World War II, they were told by propaganda, communism evil, communism bad, Soviet Union dangerous, Soviet Union a threat. And then the Soviet Union is gone. And then we have this globalization with the rise of Asia and the movement of industries to manufacturing to China and also to South Korea and elsewhere, and also to other countries. So Britain loses its shipping industry, or America loses much of its shipping industry because they can't compete in building ships and making steel with Asia and Latin America. And this causes many people within those countries that work in those industries to become angry and furious and wondering and demanding that free trade agreements not be reached that threaten their jobs, and demanding that the leaders of their countries listen to them. You know, one of the sources, one of the motivations behind populism. So, Europeanization is really important, because if we're going to deal with the threat and challenge of nationalism in Europe, we have to talk about what's going on in the member states as a result of European integration. How does this work? And, you know, and people have never really had a clear plan about how this was going to work. They don't really have a good theory about how this is going to work. We just have to do something after 1945 and tens of millions dead and nuclear weapons being developed and used. We European leaders, Robert Schuman, Jean Monnet, Adenauer in Germany, De Gasperi in Italy, Churchill in Britain, we have to do something to make sure that there's not another World War III, right? So how this Europeanization process works, there wasn't a clear plan or understanding of how that would function. And it's still a challenge in the textbook, because I think that, you know, there's this challenge of trying to understand what nationalism is, and you know, that's why I'm enthusiastic about studying nationalism and studying European Union, because I want to see what the world can learn from the European Union as a peace strategy. But you know, the fact is that this populism in France, in Poland and Hungary is partly, not only, but partly a response to European integration. And so we have to accept the fact that populism and populist upsurges are always going to be present. I think that that's my view. And so if you're a peace strategist for Europe, if you're one of the European, particularly West European elite that wants to avoid nationalism, you have to deal with and accommodate and compete with and contain and control nationalism, because it's always going to be an issue for many years. Okay, so this is the new normal. And you see, I mean, you're reading the chapters in the book. You'll read a chapter on Poland. You won't read a chapter on Hungary, but it looks like France is moving in the direction of becoming more like Poland and Hungary. France, one of the founding powerful members of the European Coal and Steel Community in 1951. So all of Europe is becoming more like Poland and Hungary, rather than Poland and Hungary becoming more like Europe. And we have, of course, we have Brexit. The British vote to leave the European Union. So, so we focus on what's going on domestically within these states. How does European integration affect the institutions of the member states in terms of their government institutions, and also later in the book, their interest groups, their civil society organizations. And the Maastricht Treaty was the treaty signed in the city of Maastricht that really marked a turning point in which Europeanization and European integration would become a politically controversial topic within the member states. Prior to the 1992-93 Maastricht Treaty, there was what is called a permissive consensus among the public opinion of France and Germany and Italy, even in Britain, to accept European integration. It was not a big topic of politics, except in Britain. It was more always an issue, but not so much until after the Maastricht Treaty, not until the Maastricht Treaty was being negotiated. After the Maastricht Treaty, you see this issue of European integration become a mass level issue of political controversy within Germany, Italy, France, within the member states. Only in the last 30 years, less than 30 years. Before then, it really wasn't a topic of controversy because, you know, that was before the Soviet Union collapsed. So the book focuses upon policy, politics, and the polity, like how is France or Spain's political system evolving and changing? What is the politics of those processes in terms of what we've seen, how politicians compete with each other, and how does it affect their policies? In terms of the effect on European member state policies, the process is through transposition of EU directives, right? That's the point that we made earlier. The European Union bureaucracy is small, only 20, 30,000 people, depending on who you count. But I mean, I don't know, but the typical word is that that's about the size of the government of the city of Paris. That's it. The European Union relies upon the member states to transpose the directives that the European Union adopts. And so there's different ways that they do that. I mean, there's an Italian way of making law and implementing law in Italy that differs from the French way of making law. Even if the European Union is telling you, hey, France, you have to transpose this directive. The French say, yes, we'll transpose the directive, but they do it the French way, or they do it the German way, or they do it the Italian way, or they do it the Bulgarian way, or they do it the Greek way. And we're finding that that national way of doing things is not converging to become one European single way. We're not seeing what's called a homogenization of the institutions of the European Union member states. They're continuing to develop, affected by Europeanization, but they're continuing to develop in their own path trajectories, in their own manner to satisfy their European Union obligations. But there's a Greek way of doing that that's continuing to evolve and change and develop. There's a Bulgarian way, there's a Polish way. And that is interesting because it also implies that, you know, if there's going to be a European way of doing things, it's a European way of feeling an obligation to satisfy your superior commitment to this notion of Europe. That's what I'm working on these days, right? Trying to understand European Union as an ethical community, a sense that we have to resolve our conflicts and disputes in certain institutionalized ways and about that are right versus wrong, and emotional, and it has symbolic emotional significance. But there's still the German way, just like I am different from my friends in America, and I'm different from my family members, and I'm different from many different Americans. Still, we're all Americans in America, or you're all Koreans, but you're all different Koreans, and we're all different Americans. But we have a way of interacting with each other that we know that there's a right, or we believe that there's a right and wrong way of doing things. And we have an ideal about it too. We have an idealization, which might be a romanticized stereotype, but it's there and it's emotional and powerful. And that might be what Europeanization is creating in terms of a European community. Now, is this some kind of fantasy that's not relevant to real world? No, not at all. It is very real. I remember the book was written, published right before the pandemic broke out. And so let me show you the latest news report about this latest crisis, because crises are so important in the development of the European Union. It says here, you know, there's this tremendous rush, effort around the whole planet to vaccinate the human race, all 8 billion Homo sapiens. And so you would think that the European Union, as the most advanced, developed, modern area of the world, would be fastest at that, at vaccinating their people, and they're not, right? It says here, what's going on? You know that Europe has been slow. They vaccinated not even half the number of percentage of their population that the Americans have, for example. This is a news report from just a couple of days ago. Once it became clear Germany was pausing its vaccination of use of British AstraZeneca vaccine developed by the University of Oxford, the British announced that they're pausing it because there's some reports that there's some kind of bad side effects among a small group of people involving blood clotting. So once it became clear that Germany was pausing, that pressure mounted on other governments to hold off as well out of fear of seeming incautious and for the sake of a united front. Keep in mind, there's no scientific evidence justifying halting the AstraZeneca vaccination drive. I mean, you're going to vaccinate all 8 billion people in the world. Some of them are going to die right after they get the vaccination. It doesn't mean the vaccine caused them to die. And it might have an effect that 1 out of every million people do develop some kind of adverse reaction, fatal reaction to the vaccine. But that's 1 out of a million. That's maybe the same as the vaccination reaction of people who get the mumps and measles or flu vaccination. But this is not about science and epidemiology. This is about emotion and fear in the pandemic and this new world of a new coronavirus and the lockdowns and the disruption it's causing, generating collective anxiety and fear and nationalism. Because as I said, nationalistic behavior emerges and intensifies as the pace of change and insecurity and fear and anxiety in the world and in society intensifies. It says here, after days of touting the safety of AstraZeneca's vaccine, remember, of course, Britain just left the European Union, and this is a source of anger and hostility. And the British are far and ahead advanced of the rest of Europe in their vaccinations. So there's a lot of emotion involved here, collective emotion involved. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to watch nationalism at work in the developed countries like Europe. After days of touting the safety of AstraZeneca's vaccine, Italy's health minister, Robert Speranza, took a call from his German counterpart on Monday and learned that Germany was concerned enough about a few cases of serious blood clots among some who had received the vaccine to suspend its use. For Italy and its neighbors, that call could not have come at a worse time. Remember, the scientists say, don't do it, don't halt the vaccination, but they did it anyway. Their vaccine rollouts were already lagging because of shortages, and they were encouraging people to get those shots that were available. Only days earlier, Prime Minister Mario Draghi reassured Italians who had become wary of the AstraZeneca vaccine. There is no clear evidence, clear correlation that these events are linked to the administration of the vaccine, he said. But once Germany hit pause, the political pressure, the pressure mounted on other governments to do the same, lest public opinion punish them if they seemed incautious by comparison for the sake of a united European front. If Germany pauses, public opinion pressure in Italy and France would demand that the Italian government and the French government also pause, because we're all part of Europe. And Germany's the leading power in the European Union. Germany pauses, and you, French and Italian government, I'm an Italian, you're not pausing? I don't trust you. Oh, this is terrible. Like, the Italian government is incompetent. The Italian government is dangerous. And so they paused because Germany paused. And Germany paused without any scientific reason to do that. This is all about emotion. This is all about collective action and collective herd mentality. Germany's decision set off a domino effect of defections from the vaccine. A cascade of countries, Italy, Spain, France, and Spain, soon joined the decision to suspend AstraZeneca, dealing a significant blow to Europe's already shaky inoculation drive, despite lack of clear evidence that the vaccine had caused any harm. Meanwhile, Britain is vaccinated, I think, 25% of its adults using the AstraZeneca vaccine. And there's no report coming out of Britain about blood clots. On Tuesday, the European Union's top drug regulator pushed back against concerns about their shot, saying that there was no sign of it's causing dangerous problems and that its life-saving benefits outweigh the risk of side effects. Even if it does cause fatal reactions in 1 out of 2 million people, it still should be taken. I mean, every time you get into a car to drive somewhere in Seoul, there's 1 in 2,000 chance you will die. But do you stop using the car? No, you don't. You do not stop using the car. I think it might be. I mean, I remember reading in the US years ago that every time I drive in the United States, I have 1 in 1,500 chance, 1 in 100,500 chance to die. Do I stop driving the car? No, I don't. So there's 1 in 2 million or 1 in 1 million possibilities that I might have the rare genetic makeup that caused me to die if I get the AstraZeneca vaccine. Does that mean I don't take the vaccine? Of course not. But that's not how people are thinking, right? And that's what the European Medicines Agency said. The European Medicines Agency was still studying the issue, said Emmer Koch, its executive director, adding that there was no indication the vaccine would cause these conditions. And they just announced today that there's no evidence. Don't stop. There's no evidence. They just announced that today. It appears increasingly clear that the suspensions have as much to do with political considerations as scientific ones. There is an emotional situation that is the fallout from this case that started in Germany. Giorgio Palu, the president of Italy's Medicines Agency, said on Tuesday, he said, there is no danger. There's no correlation at the epidemiological level. The agency's director was more explicit. It was a political choice. Nicola Mangrini, the director of, told La Repubblica newspaper on Monday, saying that Italy suspended the administration of the AstraZeneca vaccine because other European countries had decided to do so. So one silver lining indication of this news report is that there is this sense, a strong sense among Europeans that they are European. I mean, Americans don't have a strong sense about what Mexico would decide to do about the vaccine. Who cares? Because they don't self-identify with the Mexicans. Of course, I'm being facetious. But the Europeans cannot ignore in Italy what the Germans decide to do, because they feel that they share a comparative evaluative bond, that we are all sharing a common standard or criteria for evaluation of behavior, about right versus wrong, about good versus bad, including in policy. And they're trying to explain all of this because they're under political pressure, under crisis pressure. This is an ongoing crisis. So everybody knows that the British are not stopping the AstraZeneca vaccine. Why are you stopping it? France, Italy, Germany. By Tuesday, some governments were already recasting their decisions as a step to buck up confidence in vaccinations, a regrouping of sorts of a troubled effort. But for now, the suspensions seem certain to have had the opposite effect, further delaying Europe's stumbling rollout and perhaps putting at risk hundreds or thousands more lives. So, this goes on to highlight, this is fascinating. Of course, the Pfizer vaccine, that was developed by a German company, BioNTech, but they don't have it. Some cases of immune thrombocytopenia, The disorder characterized by a lack of blood platelets have been reported in the United States in people who have received the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines. But it's like, again, 1 in 1 million, or not even 1 in 1 million, like 1 in 2 or 3, 4 million. There was a doctor in Louisiana, I think, who got the Pfizer vaccine. He was a doctor, and he developed this response, and he died from a stroke because of the low platelets. And it probably was, he was one of these 1 in 2 million or 3 million people that have a genetic problem, weakness, that the Pfizer vaccine triggered. But like, it's been, I mean, I've heard no other reports about it in the US. Does that mean you don't take the Pfizer vaccine? No, you take it. The European countries have not been weighing a decision about just any vaccine. The concern center on AstraZeneca, a company with which they had poisonous relations, to drastically scale back projected vaccine deliveries for the early part of 2021. And this is, of course, tied up with Brexit. The spat prompted the European Union to tighten rules on the export of these shots and others from factories within the bloc. And it deepened a long-standing distrust of the vaccine among some European health officials. The bloc was slow to authorize the vaccine, waiting until a month after Britain had done so. But there is this nationalist social identity theory processes at work that, well, we don't have the AstraZeneca vaccine, and we feel bad that we're late, but the AstraZeneca vaccine is not safe. Ha-ha! So now I feel good about myself because we're wiser and safer than the British. This is called social creativity in thinking. How do I maintain my positive self-image? The British are fast, but they're not as safe as us. We care more about people than they do, which is all BS. But that's what nationalists do. Versus social competition, like go to war. Even once European regulators authorized that a number of member states restricted the vaccine's use to younger people, citing insufficient clinical data on its use in older people. And then it goes on here. That decision may come back to haunt European lawmakers. Britain, which has given the vaccine to all adults, has given the vaccine to all adults. Britain has already given the vaccine to all adults in Britain. Has since showed the first dose substantially reduced the risk of older people becoming ill with COVID-19. And it goes on here. So this is just fascinating, watching this unfold, this once in a century event. And so, you know, and there's this, and of course they don't mention this news report, but that's what the British nationalists, the pro-leave, pro-Brexit advocates are saying. Ha, 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 we left the European Union and we're faster than you. It was a good idea. See, we proved in this once in a century event that Brexit was wise. Ha, 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 we're great, we're great. And the Europeans are responding, right, at this once in a century crisis that threatens global civilization. Right? So how is Europeanization responding to all of that? Well, we'll have to talk about that on our own because, of course, as I mentioned, the book was published right before the pandemic began. So, of course, the member states are still very, very important. You got that sense, right? But even though they're unique and different, the Italians still respond to the German way of doing things because they're comparing themselves intimately and closely with Germany. There's a German way of doing things, a French way, an Italian way, but still when the Germans decide that to halt AstraZeneca vaccines for a while, the French and Italians come under all that pressure that they cannot resist their governments to halt it as well. Even though there's an Italian way of doing things that's different from the German way of approving medicines. So, but, you know, I mean, how did we get here? Well, we have to look at transposition of directives. We have to see how the Europeans transpose directives and in different areas that they have done so. They have focused on Europeanization focuses, for example, on environmental policy and cohesion policy. These are two areas that the European Union has really tried to emphasize its added value to the peoples of Europe, that the Europeans need to coordinate under the European framework to come up with European environmental standards and also to develop the poor parts of European Union that expanded with the enlargement into Eastern Europe through so-called cohesion policy. So cohesion means to keep Europe cohesive, we've got to raise the level of the poor parts of Europe to make them more equal to with the rich parts, so that there's economic and political incentives to stay cohesive and united. Cohesion means money for poor regions of Europe from the rich regions. That's cohesion policy. The one word phrase that summarizes that is called cohesion. And it might well work. I mean, again, you're not reading about Hungary, but you're going to read about Poland. And even though the Polish Nationalist Law and Justice Party is resisting and opposing European Union interference in its human rights treatment of women and LGBTQ people, they also like the money that the European Union is transferring to the poor farmers and the poor regions of Poland through the European Union system. And that will always be there. And that will always restrain Polish populism. That will always keep Hungarian populism, I think, within certain frameworks, because, you know, nationalism is one of the many motivations that people have in their policy behavior, but it's not the only motivation for collective behavior of countries. There are economic incentives are very powerful and very strong. People do like money. I recognize that. You recognize that, right? And so populism is there, but so also is the strong economic incentives for Poland and Hungary, even as they fight with the European Union, not to leave the European Union. And probably true with Marine Le Pen. If she becomes president, she's already saying, we're not going to leave the European Union. We're not going to leave the euro. We're not going to do Brexit. But we're going to become more like Poland and Hungary. We're going to reduce immigration into France greatly. But we're not going to, you know, so, and those are economic interests. And so in some of my lesson plans, right, I highlight that here's a table of all of the, I won't spend any time on this, of the motivations that countries have, and countries always have more than one motivation, but some motivations are more important than others depending upon the time and the context of the international relations that they're in. So nationalism is here, right? But that's one category of foreign policy motivation. But economic vested interests are very important. I mean, Japan's foreign policy since 1945 has been dominated by this, right? This has been number one, not the only one, but number one. Bureaucratic vested interests, very strong in the United States. The vast national security establishment created during the Cold War is huge, huge, huge. And it is driving very substantially American foreign policy. And then there's defense against perceived threats from China and Russia, also very powerful. Some of these are old, like loot, that's ancient medieval motivations, not so important these days. Frontier dynamics, that's, for example, Israel's expansion of the West Bank. Messianic, this is from another book by my mentor, Foreign Policy Motivation. So when I talk about populism, when I talk about nationalism, when I talk about vested economic interests, they're all important. And the government foreign policy of Poland and Hungary or France has got to reconcile all of these demands, economic, populist, nationalist, religious, cultural demands to produce a nationalist behavior that will be milder than what we saw in the 1930s, much, much, much milder than what we saw in the 1930s in Europe, I think. And that's pretty much the best we can do, unless we come up with a new Cold War against China, and then, again, a new enemy of my enemy is my friend, and so let's all bind together against China, which there'll be strong incentives to do that. From these groups that are looking for a new enemy since the Soviet Union disintegrated. And, you know, political Islam, that's pretty weak. I mean, you know, that's not China. So back to, and so we're running out of time here. So let's go to, well, let me see, stop share and then screen share again. You go back to the notes, share. Okay, so Europeanization, has become more and more important, and it's becoming now more important with the rise of populism. It's typically called post-functional approaches to understanding European integration, societal pressures and forces that are pushing the member state governments to act in ways that they cannot control. Until 1992, 93, remember, it was the governments that led this process. It was the executive branch of the member state governments that drove European integration. There was a permissive consensus amongst the mass of the population. They didn't pay attention to European integration very much until the 1990s. And now they are paying attention because of a suspicion that their governments are more concerned about European integration than about the demands and needs of the people of their countries, as stoked and encouraged by demagogues like Nigel Farage and other populists outside of Europe like Donald Trump. So we already talked about the definition of Europeanization. It's an incremental process that began after World War II, and it has produced what they call distinct levels of structures of governance in Europe. That is, of political, legal, and social institutions associated with political problem solving, sorry, that formalize interactions among the actors, and of policy networks specializing in the creation of authoritative European rules. So that is another way of stating earlier that what I said about Europeanization has made legally required the right of each member state in the European Union to have input into the policymaking of the other member states, that they have the legal right to do that. And we all acknowledge it. And this upsets the populists today in Europe, because it has had more impact on European political and social conditions. For example, when the European Union expanded into the former communist countries, as I said, from 800,000 to 1 million Polish people moved to Britain to get jobs in Britain. That's just from Poland. Now, they were all needed. They all had jobs there. Unemployment rate was very low in Britain. And economists would say, that's good. More wealth for everyone. But it also means more inequality and more perceived unfairness, that I'm an English person, and when I was a kid, everybody spoke English. Now, when I go to the post office or when I go to the store, I hear or go to I see all of these Polish newspapers and people speaking Polish and doing things that a good English person never does, and I don't like it. I don't feel comfortable in my own country anymore. I want to feel comfortable in my own country. And so I don't want to see people that act differently than me, that behave differently than me, that look differently from me. And they have problems because, being an immigrant can be a challenge. You're under stress, you're lonely, you act in different ways, you make mistakes, social mistakes that you didn't know you're making. So Europeanization can be both bottom up and top down, and so we're seeing bottom up initiatives insofar as, for example, the German way of doing things becoming more and more influential through Germany influencing the European Union to impact, for example, through the European Union, how Greece is reforming its corrupt and dysfunctional public administration. For example, that's bottom-up Europeanization. Top-down Europeanization means European policies and directives as a perspective, but it's a cycle. It works both ways, of course. And so Europeanization is a complex process in terms of causation because it's a feedback process. Some of the points that are about what Europeanization is not. It is not convergence. We don't see, Germany, Italy, Greece, Bulgaria all adopting one set of common institutional structures. That's not what is happening. Europeanization is a response to the European Union pressures and incentives, but there's an Italian way and a German way and a French way of evolving and responding and evolving and developing in response to them that maintains their own particular national, what we call path dependency or path trajectory. Harmonization means policies that cooperate and integrate with each other, but are not the same as adopting the same policies. So harmonization means facilitating cooperative policy agreements among the member states, but it doesn't mean convergence. And so Okay, so we want to go to our debate. Let's go to our debate, because we have to make sure we have time for the debate. And so,
Sir,
yes.
can
Oh,
we show the
attendance. Thank you. Thank you. So let's go to, I got to log out and then log back in. And thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And let me share a screen again so you can see what I'm doing here. And like this, and we go to European Politics and Society, attendance, and here, and we go add smart attendance. And the number is 493. 493 is your number. 493 is your smart attendance number. Okay. And so I'll let that, got a couple more people that have to sign in. I got to go then to the assignment, and because I can't, and we go to assignments, and 493 is your number, 493. I'll let it go for 1 minute here before I shift to the assignment. Well, 493 is the number. So let me go to assignment. And so we see that this is the debate topic. And to South Koreans, if Europe can Europeanize, then Asia can Asianize. That's the topic. Now, I can't, we have a vote here. And so I'm, before I allow you to vote, let's do a debate. So what I need to go do now is to stop the share and then goes to breakout rooms and create 2 breakout rooms and assign automatically. And the person that's the person that's the second person each group will be the one that will speak for the group. Group 1 is pro, group 2 is con. So group 1 is pro, and that's Yoon Suk Chu is pro, will speak for pro, and Subin Pak will speak for con. So open all rooms and go. So group 1 is pro and group 2 is con. So join the groups, join the groups. Join the groups. Group 1, room 1 is pro and room 2 is con on the debate topic. Subin Pak, where's Subin Pak? Subin Pak. Subin, where are you? Subin. Subin, oh, there's Subin. Okay, Subin is going to speak for Khan, and Yoon Suk Cho is going to speak for pro. So you have you've got 3 minutes. Talk to each other, communicate with each other.
So can you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm just listening.
Yeah.
Subin Pak, where's Subin Pak? Subin Pak, take charge. You're the chairperson. Two minutes.
적으로 해가지고 좀 영향력을 넓히고자 하는 건 좀 있잖아요. 그래가지고 그걸 살짝
So we are in the side of con, right?
1 minute, yes. Okay, so who's going to speak first? So heads, pro will go first, tails, con will go first. And so I flip the coin and it's heads, so pro go first. So Yoon Suk Chu, please tell us your argument for pro on the debate topic.
Yeah, hi. Actually, my argument was that, what I submitted was con, but so actually for the Asian, especially for the Eastern Asians, the organization really be like the EU can be really hard, but like ASEAN is doing something like more aiming for the cooperation about the EU, then we can be also making the organization that aiming for the better cooperation like EU. Thank you.
Okay, and Subin Pak, your argument for con.
For my opinion, in the case of Europe now, it's like they are leaving each other, and many other country peoples are also leaving. So I think it is more national than Asia.
Okay. Yeah, ASEAN states are one thing, but getting Japan and China in, but it doesn't have to include all of Asia. It could just be ASEAN countries. Maybe include big India to counterbalance China, as well as the ASEAN countries. And then if you get big India in there, you get Japan in there, they're democracies. The United States talk about the Quad, what Japan, India, Australia, and the United States, the Quad of democracies, focusing on containing China. Maybe that would be a focus. I mean, as a way by which to found an Asian Union, the way within an Asian form of NATO, the way the European Union emerged within the European form of NATO. But that's where we have to stop there. And now I'm going to ask you to vote on the debate topic. So we go to the if I can find it here, and stop share and go back to the Cyber Campus, if I can find it, Cyber Campus, and then I go, I make sure I share screen, close this, share screen, and go to Cyber Campus, and I think that's there's the Cyber Campus, go like that, and then go here and say, okay, and so vote. Please vote. And we'll take 1 minute for that and then end it, okay? So we need a few more people to vote.
Sorry, I think I should refresh the screen, sir. I don't think it's
refresh screen? Oh, okay. Thank you. Oh, there we go. And so that's the 7 people. It's usually 2 of you said pro. Okay. All right. I think what happens if I list that? Okay, that's it. All right. That's all for today. Any questions? If not, auf Wiedersehen. See you on Monday in class. Okay. Bye.